serious stuff. Got it.
Oh, I like the fossils and the dinosaurs.
Sorry?
The fossils and the dinosaurs were fun.
They were indeed. But as I said, we
Yes.
can't have too much fun. This is
No, it would be
Maimonides.
good. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
No, Maimonides was
Fun's
not
on.
a fan of fun.
All right. Oh, well,
Much
that's
too
too bad.
serious. But we will
Yeah.
try from time to time to slip in something a little lighter. I have something up my sleeve, actually. When we finish prophecy, we will talk about the Chazon Ish, actually, on who is a prophet. He wrote quite a bit on Nevuah, and it's fairly fascinating. But now we're down to bread and butter. What's the time? Coming up to the time, I think we may be in time, correct? Correct. Okay, excellent. So people can mute themselves unless they want to be able to butt in whenever the spirit takes them. And we're going to start with an introduction before we read Maimonides' words, which I think is a very important thing, and that's what we are all about in these shiurim. So Maimonides on prophecy. Who is a prophet? Well, from part 2, chapter 32, until the end of the second part, which is chapter 48, we have 16 chapters devoted to prophecy. They're fairly short, but there's still quite a lot. You'll be happy to know I don't plan to read them all. But what they really do is to link the tension between wisdom and will that we discussed in the context of the eternity of the universe with the three views on prophecy current in Maimonides' day. Now, what were the three views on prophecy current in his day? Well, first of all, there were the philosophers. Now, philosophers for Maimonides is, of course, Aristotle, but you have to remember that Maimonides lived in a milieu in which Aristotle was communicated by disciples and disciples of disciples, and also of many theologians, principally Islamic. And so I might say little about Aristotle, but the little I'll say is that I doubt whether he was a religious man. I'm not sure that Aristotle believed in God as such, gods or God. He did have room for unmoved mover for a primary cause. But whether he was at all religious, I doubt. I'm not sure. Now, Socrates was. We know from the Phaedo, from the speech written by Plato, or the dialogue about Socrates' last day when he commits suicide because he'd rather die than give up philosophy. He does ask his friends to pay a vow to give a cockerel to Asclepius, the god of healing. He promised, and he didn't want to die and know that he hadn't fulfilled his vows to the gods. So Socrates probably was. Aristotle, I'm not sure, and I doubt it. But remember, Aristotle for medieval Jews and Christians is not the Aristotle of the Greek texts. It is the Aristotle as communicated by his students of his students, many of whom were in fact tending to religion of one type or the other. So it's a very mixed bag. And in particular, I'm thinking in the context of prophecy of Al-Farabi, who lived in the 10th century, a very famous Persian polymath, who of course was a Muslim, but he was a very competent philosopher. Some doctrines of Aristotle, some doctrines of Plato, and all of that creates the intellectual environment in which Maimonides functioned, wrote, and communicated with those around him, including the perplexed Jews who looked to him to save them from their perplexity. Now, amongst these commentators on Aristotle, I mention or re-mention Themistius and Alexander of Aphrodisias. That's the island which gives the name to aphrodisiac, and you can look it up if you want. But we're going to see how Rambam, in fact, does throw these names in to the Moreh Nevukhim. But I just wanted to point out that the doctrine that Maimonides presents in the name of the philosophers is entirely a matter of talent, wisdom, and hard work. In other words, anybody. Well, when the Greeks said anybody, they didn't mean anybody, but anybody who has all the right talents and great abilities and is the best of everything that human beings possess, he or she can become a prophet. You don't need anything godly, nothing in terms of God's will, to make your mark as a prophet. It's a bit like qualifying to be a lawyer. Lahavdil elef havdalot. A lot of hard work, a bit of luck, a lot of native talent, and you can last the course. In that sense, I'm going to give you a little bit about the way Greeks approach things. Greek thought, Maimonides certainly would have been part of that world. Now, Greek thinking is very teleological. In other words, it's the telos, the aim. I'll make this very easy for you. When we're going to describe a great runner, okay? If you were a Greek living in ancient Greece, and you wanted to know what human beings could do in terms of being really good runners, you would not take a market survey of all the competent athletes in the world. It's far too democratic. If you were a Greek living in Greek times and you were an Aristotelian, you would say, what the time and the speed of the absolutely best marathon runner in Greece at that time. And this is your benchmark for what it means to be a runner, not a good runner, a runner. A runner is measured only by the absolute best that the human race can produce. The Greeks were obsessed with sport. They even counted the years according to the number of years in between marathons. Their name for a distance that you ran was a stadium, which is a stadium. But in everything they did, they always went for the absolute best. So that even though it's very clear that only 1% of the human race could achieve the standard of the top-class Olympic runner, this was how they defined a runner. So now we get to a prophet. A prophet is the absolutely best of the human race, okay, in every way, intellectually, ethically, and possessed of the capacity, the imaginative capacity, the ability to create images, to attract people by your charismatic language, by the images you conjure up with your words. The absolute best is a prophet. That is a prophet, according to Aristotelian thought, as mediated by many of the commentators and as presented to us in a very sophisticated way by Al-Farabi.
Yes,
Okay?
sir.
Can I have a regular coffee, Francis?
Okay, I would suggest that whoever hasn't muted
In my white
themselves
cup, okay?
should mute,
I
or
needed to
Yael,
try
if you
to
can
stay
mute
awake.
everybody, that would be marvelous. Good. I hope he got his coffee. So the best human is a prophet. So in other words, if you're going for the absolute best, like 1% of the human race, then you clearly need to have a lot of innate advantages. You have to be born with tremendous advantages. Then you have to nurture them. And then you have to have the good luck to be very healthy and have a lot of stamina. But if all of that works, you will be a prophet no matter what. So there we have the concept that Maimonides works with and that the perplexed would be very impressed with. Now, wisdom as opposed to divine will. The second view, and remember Maimonides stacks these up as we'll see, in terms of his three approaches to eternity of the universe, is a commonly held view. And then he says some Torah scholars and he clearly means to look down on them and dismiss them, the commoners and some Torah scholars, who is he getting at? Who do you think? Which medieval Jewish theologian would be the least Maimonidean you can think of? You have to unmute if you want your voice to be heard.
A Talmudist.
I want somebody who actually wrote a book on Jewish theology.
Oh,
Yehuda Levi?
Yehuda Levi, absolutely. Rambam takes a dig at Yehuda Levi here, okay? Who's all will and very little wisdom. And he was a poet. Maimonides is a rationalist. Now, this view is that everything is based upon will. You can only be a prophet if God wills. And God can choose anybody to be a prophet. Not the best of the human race, perhaps like Amos from Tekoa, a sheep dresser, okay? Pulled away from the herds to speak to the people of Israel. And of course, even an illiterate analphabetic like Muhammad, who, miraculously speaking, without being able to read or write, did in fact compose the Quran. Look it up. So, Maimonides is fighting on a number of fronts here. Okay, if you have any different information, I'll be happy to hear from you. The third view is the Torah view. Now, the Torah view, if Yael Bart is the host, she needs to let me do the share screen, which will be soon, okay? The Torah view is, listen carefully, is that mainly the Arab philosophers are correct in the main. Our concept of prophecy, the correct view of prophecy, has to be something which is dependent upon human achievement, nothing to do with God, except that from time to time, God can prevent prophecy happening. Interesting move there. Maimonidean, very sneaky. You can be all prepared, but God might not send you the gift. That's the way Maimonides compromises between philosophy and the Torah. Because then you could ask, why aren't all sorts of people prophets? The answer is, they may have been adequately prepared, Jew or non-Jew, but God deliberately withheld the gift. Now,
Can you
in chapter...
What is a prophet?
Okay, a prophet is someone who, well, normally we say, who can give you advice as to how to live well in the future and to avoid calamity. That's what I would say.
Any
As
rabbi can do that.
but they won't be a prophet because they won't be speaking in the name of a revelation from God. Prophecy isn't simply the rabbi who's learned and has a nice sermon and has a lot of insight and he's lucky and he tells you what to do in order to avoid a particularly bad fate. Unfortunately, I'm going to sort of confront you with the fact that I think most of our very learned rabbis in Europe, certainly in Eastern Europe, before the Shoah, were not very prophetic, especially the ones who told their flocks to stay where they were. So I wouldn't really put much prophetic trust in rabbis.
That's what
Prophets,
you call Esther Panim.
well, that's what you say, and there's certainly a case to be made for that. But prophets in the Tanakh, as the Rambam will tell us at length, have a lot more going for them. But it could very well be. And I said to you that I'm going to talk about the Chazon Ish at the end. So if you'll wait patiently, we'll see how we can possibly look through the spectacles of an East European Gadol and perhaps recreate prophecy in our time for outstanding Talmidei Chachamim, such as the Chazon Ish. But that's not what we would say intuitively, okay? So bear with me, Yoshua, as always. Now, chapter 37, Maimonides goes into the qualifications for prophecy. And he says you got to have intellect and imagination. And the two often do not go together. The intellectual is often very bad at communicating, and certainly not a charismatic communicator who can fire up the crowds, who can make a whole country, as it were, run up to the barricades, okay? So this is a very special quality indeed. Prophets, as we know from the Bible, were involved in the state. They confronted kings. They had different visions of what was going to happen and how we need to deal with what was going to happen. Now, Rambam says, well, how come the prophets in the Bible, and Yeshua, this is very significant, they all seem to prophesy in a dreamlike state. I'm not aware that my local rabbi has actually pulled out his sermons from his dreams. Of course, I don't know. I'm speaking of myself, I guess, okay? But not very dreamlike. What's the importance of dreams? Are there different grades of dreams? What's the difference between a prophetic dream or a veridical dream? Veridical, of course, means true. And a false prophet, their dreams or their visions. Rambam also talks about the prophetic type, who is, in addition to being the best intellectual of all time, is the most charismatic, imaginative communicator of all time, is not in the least interested in personal profit or gain, and nor is he consumed by any power lust. We'll read the Rambam. People with power lusts are to be avoided. Don't let them make policy. The same for people who are self-interested. They will not be good prophets. Now, my plan is to continue after we read today's chapters 32 and 37 to go into the following topics: the grades of prophecy, why the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu was totally different to that of any other prophet. And again, if we're thinking in 12th century terms, Yeshua, we're thinking of Moshe Rabbeinu, prophets of the Tanakh, Lahavdil Elef Havdalot, Mohammed, okay? These are the people we are thinking of. What really happened at Mount Sinai? Did everybody experience prophecy? Or did nobody except for Moshe? Or was it graded? Our picture of Bnei Israel experiencing God in some really high elevated fashion may be entirely false. And the common people may have had very little feeling of anything of a spiritual nature, which would, of course, make a lot of rational sense. Angels, where do they fit in? Prophets and angels often come together. What is an angel? Pseudo-prophets and Muhammad, prophets and politics. Very important. We'd compare Hilchot Yisodei Torah chapter 7 with the Moreh Nevukhim. See what Rambam does when he distills his philosophy into what he feels is suitable for popular consumption. Finally, the Chazon Ish on prophecy. I'm now going to share screen. I hope I can, Yael. And I can. Very good. Done. Well done. Let's go. Now we're going to read. Line 3. We can link the views on eternity of the universe with the views on prophecy. Those who accept the existence of God, the godly ones, religious people, have three views of eternity of the universe. There are three views about prophecy. Who's next? Line 5, third word.
Epicurus,
And who is Epicurus?
a Greek philosopher.
Greek philosopher. And about when did he live? 3rd century before the Common Era. Epicurus was actually not an atheist. he's become the symbol, because of Chazal and others, of this person who rejects God. But in fact, he was quite okay with God. The problem for Epicurus is that in life, the thing to do is to avoid suffering. And Epicurus points out, somewhat perhaps amusingly, that religion tends to increase suffering, whereas lack of religion tends to increase happiness. So therefore, don't get too involved in religion. But he definitely became a symbol, both for Jews and non-Jews, of the Epicurean, and Chazal talk about V'da ma shetashiv le'Epicurus, the denier of religion. And Rambam goes along in that mode. Just remember, though, that Epicurus wasn't actually a non-believer. Shehu lo yamin mitziuta, lo av kol shken shelo yamin nuvuah. Whoever doesn't believe in God, of course, is not going to believe in prophecy, so conversation doesn't begin. Omnam achaven deot ma'amin ha'el binuvuah. So I'm talking about the one who believes in prophecy. Hadat harishon v'udat hamon hapta'im. Rambam was never very shy in using his language. The fools, okay, the common, the hoi polloi. Mimi sheyamin b'nuvuah k'tzat hamon anshe toratenu. And here's the jibe at Yehuda Levi. And some of the small amount of the people of our Torah, gam ken yaminei, who will also believe it. God picks anybody he feels like choosing to be a prophet. And have fresh ben isha with Islam chacham. He couldn't be wise or sachal or fool. Rav hashanim, old, or tzair hashanim, or very young. Ela shehem yitnu bo gam ken ktsat tov v'tikun midot. But he says, and here it's almost ironic, but even this view does say that you have to be a little bit good to be a prophet. Nobody, even the commoners, will say that God is going to pick a bad man as a prophet. When the prophet becomes good and virtuous, perhaps Bilam is a good example, and the Torah doesn't call him a prophet. Okay, he's a kosem, all right? But Chazal do say he was a Navi. And if you're going to take the approach of Chazal, you'll say that the one time that Bilam rose to the level of prophecy, his last and third speech, he had repented. He had changed. He'd become a much better person. And he also had great skills, intellectual skills, and charismatic skills. And it came together, and on a one-time basis, he prophesied. Could be. V'adat hasheni, dat hafilosofim.
What about Avimelech? Avimelech, God spoke to him, was a good person.
That's what we're going to talk about when we talk about the levels of prophecy. Absolutely. We'll talk about all of the cases. Okay, Rambam categorizes them all. It's a very low level dream. He came to him in a dream. Dream is a very low level of what we call Ruach HaKodesh, okay? So you'll just, again, have to wait. The philosophers say that the perfection of all humanity is the prophet. And what you do when you become a prophet is you take the potential of the human race, which is aimed at becoming a prophet, and you actualize that potential. It's the potential of the race as a whole, but only one or two individuals can actually achieve it. Im lo yimna mizeh monea mizgi. Now, what is a mezeg? Aristotle in his world believed that we are subject to four humors: wet, dry, hot, cold. We have to balance in our bodies and in our lives, both physically and metaphysically, opposite qualities: wet, dry, cold, hot. If we get this right, then we have a perfect temperament. So you need the perfect temperament. Or siba achat michutz. If you don't have that, or an external impediment, illness, כמשפט כל שלמות שאפשר מציאותו במין אחד. It's like all human perfections. You have to have a lot of things going for you to get there. שלא ייתכן מציאות השלמות ההוא עד תכליתו וסופו בכל איש מאישי המין ההוא אבל באיש אחד. So the likelihood of reaching that perfection, like the champion Greek marathon runner, is very, very, very slight. ואם היה השלמות ההוא ממה שיצטרך בהגעתו למוציא, and you will need all sorts of things to help you on your way to that perfection. אי אפשר מבלתי מוציא, and these are indispensable. ולפי זה הדעת, אי אפשר שינבא השכל. So the fool or the uneducated, somebody without all of those intellectual qualities that Maimonides describes and clearly aims for, can never be a prophet. Bonsha, the Schweig, could never be a prophet. Simple people cannot be prophets. You can't go to bed and you're not a prophet and wake up next morning and lo and behold, you suddenly have become a prophet. Like picking up a lost article. אבל העניין כן, והוא שהאיש המעולה השלם בשכליותיו ובמידתיותיו, the man who's perfect intellectually and ethically, כשיהיה כוחו המדמה, when his imaginative capacity gives him the power of charismatic communication, כפי מה שאפשר להיות מן השלמות, as far as it's possible to perfect it, ויזמין עצמו הזמנה היה שתשמענה. And I'm going to tell you how you prepare yourself in life for prophecy. הוא יתנבא בהכרח. He has to prophesy. He will be a prophet no matter what. It will come about because just as somebody who is the most fantastic potential marathon runner will be able to run and win the race, so somebody will prophesy. We have it in our nature to
What
be
does
a prophet.
Be'achreach mean? I don't understand that. God has to give him prophecy?
No. Right. What Aristotle says, I told you. I doubt whether Aristotle believed in God. I think that what Aristotle is saying is that you will get to be a prophet. Whether Aristotle talked about prophets is a very debatable point. And that's why I've told you to be careful. The Aristotelians, okay, these are the falasifa, these are the philosophers, the followers of Aristotle. Now, Aristotle's ideas became so compelling that many, many, many educated religious people said, we have to take Aristotle on board in Judaism or lahavdil elef havdalot Islam. And we're going to do that. No matter that Aristotle, I do not believe, wrote anything really about God that is in any way comparable to our understanding of what a God of a religion is.
But here,
So Aristotle applies Greek philosophy, or those who follow Aristotle, and the point being, and this is the point that bothers the perplexed people who want Maimonides to help them out, prophecy is something which is within human control. The Falasifa say, especially Ibn Sina, okay, who was very radical, okay, Avicenna, God doesn't interfere. It's like any form of human perfection.
what is prophecy if there's no God?
Prophecy is a tremendous ability to give, as I said, a picture of the future. But again, you're asking me the wrong question, because Maimonides and the people he talks to all believe in God. Their problem, like many issues we have today, is how to take on board what seems to be a powerful idea that prophecy or any form of human perfection should be mainly within human control. Take that on board, put it into Torah and Chazal. So I'm going to ask you now to wait, to read Rambam together with me. And I know that you're not shy. And if you have a question, I will see it on my email. Okay? So let's read. ולא ייתכן לפי זה הדעת שיהיה איש ראוי לנבואה, I'm the fourth word on line 18. It is not possible that somebody who does the right preparation will not be a prophet. Just as somebody who has excellent health and eats healthily, lo yivaled min hamazon hahu dam tov, he will have good blood, and all his physical propensities will be grade A. That's the philosophical approach. V'adat hashlishi hu dat Toratenu. I'm towards the end of line 19. What does our Torah say? Yisod datenu hu kamoze hadat ha-philosophi batzmo. Mark that phrase. We follow the philosophers. Ela b'davar echad, but in one thing we don't. וזה שאנחנו נאמין שהראוי לנבואה מכין עצמו לה, אפשר שלא יתנבא וזה ברצון אלוהי. God might withhold prophecy. That understanding of what is about to happen, of how you should act to ensure the optimal result for yourself, your family, your community, your people, your nation, for the world, God might withhold that understanding. The last lap, you'll be defeated. והנמנע מזה אומנם הוא כמי שנמנע מהניע ידו כרובם, או נמנע הראות כמחנה מלך ארם בעניין אלישע. Rambam cites two passages in Tanakh. The first one is about Jeroboam, who, as you know, sets up a competing temple in Bet El, and he's about to offer the sacrifice, and a prophet from Yehudah comes and says, you know what? The kings of Yehudah are going to produce a son called Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu will come and he will destroy this temple. The earth will crumble in the altar, and you will all be destroyed. Yerovam, who's about to offer a sacrifice, raises his hand to say, take this man away, kill him. His hand is suddenly paralyzed. He cannot move it. God has interfered, as a result of which Yerovam turns pale, and the prophet says, I'm going to help you restore the use of your hand, which is restored. And then Yerovam said, I'm sorry, I'd like to give you a meal, look after you. Prophet says, no, I don't take meals with you, and I don't want you to look after me. Look at your altar. Suddenly the altar starts to collapse, and all the earth comes out. The story continues. You can read it up in the Tanakh. But Rambam says the other issue is when the Arameans came to capture Elisha, the Israelites' secret weapon in the northern kingdom. They captured him, and what did he do? He prayed to God. God blinded all the Arameans. And so Elisha was only seeing one. They said, which way to Aram? And Elisha says, this way. He takes them straight into Shomron. And then they are relieved of their blindness. But Elisha says, I'm going to let you go. You've learned your lesson. So this is preventing, okay, the prevention to prevent people losing their natural ability. Normally, you can use your hands very smoothly, correct? Normally, you can see and nothing interferes. Prophecy is a natural gift, just like moving your limbs, just like seeing. But God can prevent you, if he wants to prevent you, from being able to use that gift. It's all there. You have 20/20 vision. You're perfectly programmed and smoothly running body. God can stop that. Let's read on, okay? Line 27, V'omnam heyot yisodenu ha'achana v'ashleimut b'midot u'v'sechel, v'al kol panim hu amram, ela nevuah shora ela al chakam gibor v'ashir. In Shas, we learn, using Moshe actually as a prototype, Chazal say that nevuah only rests on certain people. We already see that Chazal require preparedness, or they require you to be a chacham, wise, and ashir, rich, and a gibor, a mighty person. Now the Rabbeinu Nisim in Masechet Nedarim says it means literally, you've got to be very wise, but you've got to be very rich and very strong. Only then will people respect you. Rambam, of course, will have none of this. He says Chacham is, of course, the intellectual. Gibor is the ethical person who can overcome his evil desires and lusts. And Ashir is somebody who has a rich and powerful imagination. Then you can look at the other commentators, but this is always the dispute between Rambam and other Rishonim. Chapter 7, which we will look at the end. If you look, read Tanakh, you'd see groups called Bnei HaNevi'im. Who are they? What are they doing? They're preparing themselves, according to Rambam, for a life of prophecy, but they have to go through this incredibly rigorous training. That's why they are Bnei HaNevi'im. Now Rambam says, I'll give an example from Tanakh, somebody who was definitely prepared to be a prophet. Baruch ben Neriah, the chief advisor and scribe to Yirmiyahu. Shehu halach achar Yirmiyahu v'lamdo v'hechino. Yirmiyahu prepared him and taught him. But he failed. There's a very puzzling passage in Yirmiyahu. It says, Yagati ba'anchati u'menucha lo matzati. Baruch ben Neriah says, I was frustrated. I hoped to reach sunny uplands, and instead, I ended up in storm-tossed waters. The Yirmiyahu says to him, Ko tomar elav, ko amar Hashem, this is what God says, V'ata tavakesh lecha gdulot al tavakesh. You can't get this last lap without God wishing to give it to you. It's almost like gadol alecha, we say in Hebrew, too much for you. God decided not to give you the final step. Now, if you look at other commentators, they will say that Baruch ben Neriah was complaining that Yirmiyahu didn't find him a good fat position in the royal court. But Chazal, Radak, Rashi, they cite the Rambam's approach that he didn't get to be a Navi like Yirmiyahu. Remember, who was Eliyahu's Navi in training? Elisha. Elisha got there. But Baruch ben Neriah didn't. Okay? He didn't get there. At the destruction of the temple, the Nevi'im didn't get a vision. Rambam says that when you are in Galut, you cannot be a prophet. So, sure, you don't need to answer this, but that's another reason why we not find rabbinical prophets running around in Zurich or in London or in New York. It can only happen here.
That's the reason why the rabbis before the Shoah didn't know anything.
That is absolutely true. They did not reach the level of Nevuah. גם נביאיה לא מצאו חזון מהשם מפני אותם בגלות, אלא שנמצא כתובים רבים מהם כתובי הספרים ומהם דברי חכמים, כולם הולכים על זה היסוד. והוא שהלוע, beginning of line 31, יביא להינבא מי שירצה מתי שירצה. God chooses who and when. אמנם לשלם המעולה בתכלית, but only to the perfect person. אבל הפתאים מעמי הארץ, אי אפשר זה אצלנו, we would never accept אצלנו that an ignorant person could be a prophet. Who is he digging at this time? Muhammad. Okay, רצוני לומר שנביא אחד מהם, אלא כאפשרות הנביא חמור או צפרדע. As I said, Rambam never spares his punches. Can you imagine a donkey prophesying or a frog prophesying? Now, why did he choose Chamor and Sfardea? Chamor, quickly, anybody. Why did he choose?
Bilam.
I'm hearing Bilam. Yes, I got it from Debbie on my left before, just a second before. Bilam. We could think that the Chamor, she saw what Bilam didn't see. That's not prophecy. It's something, it's not prophecy. Why Sfardea? Well, Ibn Janach and Radak say Tzfardea means a great fish. Whose great fish could be said to be a prophet?
Yonah?
Who? Yonah, exactly. There's a chazal that the Tzfardeim, when they were asked by God to fill the land of Egypt, they jumped into the misharotam, into the ovens. Ovens are hot. So they were Moseh Nefesh. They gave up their lives for the sake of God, perhaps the frogs too in Egypt, okay? But this is why he chooses the Chamor and the Tzfardea very clearly. Ze Yesodenu, line 32 at the end. She'iv shami bulti ait lamdut v'ashleimut. But these are not prophets. Once you get to be the most perfect person, then all depends upon God's decision. Now the Rambam says, you can ask me a good question. Yirmiyahu, what did God say to Yirmiyahu in the first chapter? B'terem et tzaracha v'beten yidaticha, v'terem tetzei merechem hikdashticha. Before you went out of the womb, I knew you. And before you went out of the womb, I had already destined you to be a prophet. I'm going to explain to you, you need natural talents. God says, I'm giving you the health, the abilities, the natural talents that you need to be a prophet. In Hebrew, Yosef HaTzadik is called a nar when he's in jail. What do they say? Nar ivri. Yeshitanu nar eved ivri. Okay? How old was Yosef? 30. Then it goes on to talk about Yoshua. I'm going to skip a few lines. Okay? So Yoshua was actually, according to the Rambam's calculation, 57 years. Okay, when he was appointed leader. So he wasn't a boy. Don't be bamboozled by Nar. He brings a pasuk from Yoel, and he talks about Ma'amad Har Sinai. I'm going on to page 2. I'm going to précis this for you. He says that don't think that people at Mount Sinai were prophets, but Moshe alone went into the crowd. Line 3, V'nigash Moshe levado el Hashem vehem lo yigashu. Aaron amata mimenu. It was all graded. Aaron after Moshe. Nadav and Avihu after Aaron. 70 elders. Ushar ha'adam lamata mehem lefi shleimu yotehem. Line 5. The people of Israel only received some type of spiritual revelation at Sinai if they were sufficiently well prepared. Rambam does not accept in any way the idea that the entire people rose to an incredibly high spiritual level. Not at all. Couldn't have happened. And he cites a very unknown Mechilta, line 5, Moshe mechitza b'fnei atzmo, Aaron mechitza b'fnei atzma. Moshe and Aaron were in separate levels, and so everything is graded hierarchically. The next chapter, chapter 33, is about Ma'amad Har Sinai. We're not going to do that now. What I want to do with you very briefly, so we finish tonight on time, and then we have some question time, is chapter 37. So this will be a little bit brief, but as you see, although it's Ibn Tibbon's text, it's not too hard to read. No. Ki amitat ha-nevuah ma'uta shefa shofei hamet Eloha yitbarach b'emsaut ha-sechel ha-po'el. Okay, I'm going to cut this a little bit, and I'm going to tell you what Rambam says in the first section here, and it's not too difficult actually to read afterwards. He says that what we need for prophecy is a rational capacity. We need to study a lot. We need to have the right type of ethical, moral approach to life. Finally, we will experience, most of us who want to be prophets, our prophecies in dreams. Why dreams? Now, here Maimonides is almost psychological. He says, when you are working with improving your intellect and your ethics, you're working mainly with your brain, okay? Your brain, you learn what's good, you learn about everything there is to be learned. But how do you develop the capacity to communicate in a charismatic way? That's associated with your dream life. Your dream life gives you images. There's no such thing in the world, for example, as a pink elephant which flies. Is there? Has anybody seen a flying pink elephant? But we human beings can dream about that. And Rambam would say that it is because of our dreams that we are able to think in a literary way, to write a story about Dumbo, okay, the little pink elephant with big ears who could fly. All of that is this capacity that allows us, by means of words and images, to move people. I think Le'elef Shuv Pamim Be'elef Alfei Elef Havdalot. George Orwell wrote a book called Animal Farm. Most of you may have read that book. It's a powerful image, okay? But pigs and men, we cannot imagine in real life pigs wearing hats, drinking beer with men and talking to them, okay? But you can create an image that speaks to people because of your dream life, things that don't really exist in the world, but because we know how to dream, there is a reality there. And that's how I understand Rambam's theory of dreams. It's not Freudian, by the way, at all. Freudian is repressive. What Rambam says is that there's going to be a difference between you and I dreaming about flying pink elephants and a prophet dreaming of flying pink elephants, because the difference lies in what we do in our waking hours. In the prophet's waking hours, he's all intellect, learning, massive ethics, massive brain, knows everything, and does all the good. You and I spend our working hours in all sorts of things which are far from these elevated activities. So when we dream and we think about and we see our, as I said, a Dumbo type flying pink elephants, we are affected by some of the pathetic and perhaps insignificant thoughts and dreams and ambitions going on in our waking lives. Rambam in this section says, for example, Chalom echad mishishim b'nevuah, line 21. Again, citing Chazal. He has a line for everything. 60th of prophecy is a dream. And then he says the next line, citing Breshit Rabbah, Novelet nevuah chalom. The fruit that falls too early off the tree, the novelet, is the prophetic dream. In other words, the dream has yet to reach its full power. That will only do when you're awake. But it is like the imaginative capacity, the images, the ideas, the figures, the drama that you are going to put into a prophetic message. And that way, rabbis fall very, very, very short of, say, a great dramatist like Yechezkel. Yechezkel sees these amazing things. Hosea does these amazing things. They make a mark on life. People stand back and say, wow. Or the prophet who came to Yerovam. This is the theory that Rambam develops. And he says that, look at the Torah itself. I don't need to go on about this. Line 25. God speaks to us in images and in dreams, but only if we are perfect will we have a prophetic vision and a prophetic dream. And we'll take that dream element and we'll go and we will enact it in real life. And this will be a prophet. Ratzoni lomar, line 28, line 29, b'mareh o b'chalom. וכבר נודע שעניין שיהיה האדם בעת קיצתו והשתמש חושיו להתעסק בו מאוד, שוקד עליו נחשף לו, הוא אשר יעשה הכוח המדמה בו בעת השינה. Your imagination takes over when you're asleep. It gives you dreams about what interests you, drives you, and compels you during the day. Kefi hachanato, according to how perfect you have become. V'hahimshel bazeh v'harbot hamamar bo mutar. I don't need to say any more because everybody understands that. Now, from line 33 onwards, Rambam talks about the preparations that we have to make to become a prophet. First of all, he says, you have to have a great temperament. You have to have the ability to study and learn. And you have to have, in addition to that, you have to have a tremendous ethical drive. Now, he criticizes the sensualists and the carnal beings. Line 38, beginning, and we want the prophet to be somebody who's no longer subject to lusts and animal-type desires. Somebody for whom eat, food, drink, and sex, and the tactile sense. These are the things that he or she are really interested in. Asher bi'er aristo b'midot. And here he cites the Nicomachean ethics. Okay? So Rambam read Aristotle. But as I said, he puts Aristotle into a theological religious framework. But he knows his Aristotle. And this is what Aristotle said too. V'amar b'shezeh achush cherpa lanu ma tov ma she'amar. That tactile sense is the shameful mark of the perfect human being. So Rabbah wants to rise above the physical and the carnal. Again, well known. This is because we are animals. What can we do? But en bo davar me'inyan ha'enoshut. Strong language. This has nothing to do with our humanity. He doesn't mean humanity, 99.9% of the human race. He means that one perfect human being who's transcended all physical, carnal desires. Now he says, of course, that sight, smell, and sound, not everything physical is bad. וכבר נתגלגל המאמר במה שאינו מן העניין, אלא שהוא צריך אלו, כי רוב מחשבות הנודעים מאנשי החוכמה נטרדות בהנאות זה החוש. It's the carnal, the tactile, the touch that he is opposed. And that is going to stand in the way of your achieving prophecy. ויפעלו עם זה איך לא ינבאו אם תהיה נבואה ממה שבטבע, וכן ראו שיהיה זה האיש. Okay, so then he goes on to say, not only are you free of carnal desires, but look at line 2, okay? Towards the end, where my cursor is. האיש כבר נתבטלה מחשבתו, פסקה תשוקתו לשררות, שאינם אמיתיות. ברצוני לומר, בקשת הניצוח, או הגדיל העם לו, המשיך כבודם אליו, ועבודתם מפני זה levado. You have to be free of the lust for power, to be adored by people, by the crowds, to be carried on a wave of popularity. Rambam is a severe anti-populist, anti-demagogue. I want my prophet to be totally free of any desire to power or to rule. Just like the prophet who refuses Yerovam's overtures, don't want your food, don't want your hospitality. I'm going back to my simple life as a prophet. So Rambam then goes on to talk about the prophetic type, who's somebody who lives a life that's totally devoted to ideal. He resists all physical pleasures as a way of life. He only indulges in them if he has to. And he also resists the drive and the desire to power. This sort of person is best placed. But remember, God might not give it to him. Now, the last section, good, we will be timed in. Line 14. וכבר ידעת, כי כל כוח גופני יחלש וילה ויפסד את ויבריא את אחרת. know that sometimes you're in top form. Sometimes, perhaps at 9:15 at night or 10 o'clock in a Moreh Nevukhim Shiur, you're not quite on your top form, okay? We are human beings. We change. Now, koach hamadameh, but those whose life is a life of the mind are usually okay for most of their lives, usually. But if you want to have that charismatic gift of powerful communication and imagination, then you need a good sound body. And also a happy state of mind, or at least you have to have a state of mind that is in always equitable. It's always calm. That's why if you're in mourning, you won't be able to prophesy. Or if you're angry, you won't be able to prophesy. Amram, line 16. Rambam has another line from the Gemara. Gemara in Shabbat says you don't get to prophesy, neither if you are sad, nor if your body, atzlut doesn't mean laziness. It means that you feel weak. You've lost your drive, lost your energy. שיעקב אבינו לא בעתהו נבואה כל ימי אבלו, להתעסק כוחו המדמה בהפקד והיפקד יוסף. Yaakov Avinu, remember, lost his prophecy. He was in mourning over Yosef. He never got it back until the word was given that Od Yosef Chai. What's the operative phrase? How do we know that Yaakov got prophecy back when Yosef living was brought to his attention? Vatechi ruach Yaakov avihem. How do you explain that phrase? Rambam will have explanation. The ruach is ruach hakodesh. He became a prophet again. Now he knows he can go down to Egypt. He has a message from God. What will happen? All of this comes back to him. His command of the fate of his family, people, nations of the world, that prophecy, the kernel of prophecy comes back to him. But all the years he was in mourning, it wasn't there. Okay? ושמשה עליו השלום לא בעתהו נבואה כבואה מקודם, מאחר תנועת המרגלים. Now the Rambam refers to a very, again, not well-known Gemara, Masechet Tanit. Moshe Rabbeinu, all the 38 years, never really experienced a prophecy like experienced in Egypt, okay? Because he was just depressed by the tragedy of the Dor HaMidbar, the generation that had refused to go on Aliyah because of the spies. And his frustration with the people. אבל שפע השכל עליו מבלתי אמצעיות, כמו שזכרנו פעם שהוא לא התנבא במשל כשאר הנביאים. Even though Moses' prophecy was different, sui generis to the other prophets, he still needed that koach hamadameh, which is tied to your physical and psychological well-being. וכן עוד תמצא קצת הנביאים ניבאו מידת זמן. Some prophets only prophesy for a short time. They're very short books. ואחר כן נפסקה נבואה מהם ולא התמידהו להם בעבור מקרה שנתחדש. Something happened and they were no longer prophets. והיא הסיבה העצמית הקרובה בהפסק הנבואה בזמן הגלות. Coming back to the Golus. That's why it stops in Golus. ולא ספק כלומר עצלות או עצבות שיהיה לאדם בעניין מן העניינים יותר רע מאותו עבד נקנה נאבד לשכלים הזונים. Rambam now, I think, turns to his period. Remember his life, stormy, persecution, common to our ancestors, more common than the happy, easygoing one. He says, how can you prophesy when you are in the hands of slaves, people of a slave mentality, selling you from one to the other, fools, idiots, people are rife with carnal lust, שקיבצו היעדר הדיבור האמיתי ותגבור את כל התאווה הבהמיות ואין לאל ידיך and citing the Tochacha, there's nothing you can do about it. You are in the hands of these people, and therefore there's no possibility of prophecy. That's the answer to the question, why are there no prophets today? Well, at least in Rambam's time. Ya'adeinu ra, v'hu asher atzah bo'omro yishotutu levakesh edvar Hashem v'lo yimsal. Pasuk from Amos. They were crawling around, doing their best to get God's word, but after Churban, you can prepare yourself, you're not going to get there. V'amar malka v'sarei bagoyim, once the king and the princes are in exile amongst the nations, en Torah, no Torah, gam neviyeha lo matz'u chazon me'Hashem. Prophets have no vision because it's after the destruction and the people is in galut. V'zeh emet muvora ha'ila ki hakli kvar nitbatel. In other words, the instrument you need to bring your prophecy to fruition no longer exists. The koach hamedameh, Rambam calls this the capacity for the imaginative world, needs good health, and it needs a psychological state of calmness. V'hu hasiba gam ken b'shuv hanuvuah lanu al minhaga limot hamashiach mehera yigale kemo she'iyeh. Rambam ends up by saying, let's hope Mashiach comes quickly, bring Mashiach now, and we'll get prophecy back. Okay, it is 10:15. I'm going to remove the screen share, and it's time for questions, if anybody has.
I've got a question.
Okay.
If Cheskel was the last prophet you've imagined being sublime bliss and relaxing and happy and feeling good about himself. I mean, his mavot are really, and they're anxious, anxiety, even neurotic.
Yeah. Rambam, by the way, will explain that Yechezkel came from Eretz Israel, and God, as it were, made him a shaliach for the prophets of Eretz Israel. So he brings the gift of prophecy to the galut, but he's an exceptional case. Okay, to every rule there is an exception, but he's, as it were, continuing the tradition of Eretz Israel, and it may be that the bizarre and surreal nature of Yechezkel's prophecies reflect the fact that he's not in Eretz Israel anymore, and that it's kind of a little bit off the wall. Okay, but the Rambam has a lot to say about that. I mean, he has a lot to say about everything. He wrote a big book called Guide of the Perplexed, and I'm not going to do in an hour justice to anything. We're only taking bits and pieces, but I'm trying to give you a composite picture. So what he does is he says that this is the phenomenon of the last prophet who connects Eretz Israel to the Golah, and therefore it's a little bit off the wall, but it is Maaseh Merkava. The Rambam has several chapters devoted to Maaseh Merkava. I'll try and say something about that, but the point is certainly a well-taken one, and it actually adds to our understanding that there are prophets, and there are prophets, there are prophecies, and there are prophecies. Okay, Melanie, you wanted to say something.
Well, it was much the same kind of point. I was going to say that the number of prophets, far from being in a state of, far from the people being in a state of psychological calmness, they were inveighing precisely against the opposite. A complete deterioration of morality and so on. And so I just wonder what this state of psychological calmness ever was.
Okay, the state of psychological calmness refers to the prophet. So the prophet himself is apparently not entirely overcome by the conditions of his time. Okay, Yaakov Avinu was apparently rendered absolutely a shever kli. He was a broken vessel. He was a broken person, psychologically broken by the disappearance of Yosef. Prophets deal with all sorts of situations. That's their job. Okay, they are shakers and movers on the political front. They are in the royal courts. They are criticizing, they are going to the people, they're trying to get the points across, but they are inside like a rock. When that rock begins to crumble, Moshe Rabbeinu, who Rambam says was apparently in some kind of dark mood when he realized that whatever he did, this lot that he took out of Egypt was never going to make the grade. This influenced his rock-like self, and he, as it were, founded on a rock later on. But that was just an excuse, really. Okay, so it's not that the prophet is. Prophets are there to deal with crises.
But
Prophet,
but sorry, wasn't the point that was being made,
Yeah.
the psychological calmness, to explain why we don't have prophecy today, or why there was no further prophecy?
Correct. Rambam says that the state of Galut is such, I think
Exactly.
he's referring to himself, that you cannot rise above, you cannot be in touch with your inner rock.
That's what I'm saying. It was always
Yeah.
like that. It was like
No,
that
no.
with the prophets.
Well, no, Rambam would say the biblical prophets were not like that, not at all. That's why they are the biblical prophets, and they are in the courts, and they do their thing, and they go and do it. They may say that it's very hard and very tough, but normally they go and they do it. Elisha, Elijah, Hosea, Amos, Yeshayahu, those fantastically
Yeah, they
beautiful.
rose above their surroundings, in other words. So why aren't they able to do that now?
Because Rambam, again, cites Chazal, well known, once you are in the Galut, Jewish life is so miserable that nobody is immune to this inner trepidation and fear. We are half a person. That's all.
Okay.
You don't have a country, you don't have a state, you don't have an army. You are, if we think about the words of the Tochacha, in the morning you say, would that it would be evening. In the evening you say, would that any slight threat, and you are immediately neurotic and full of angst. This is the diaspora Jew. And Rambam's life, as we said at the very beginning, was very much like that. Imagine that. You get your bar mitzvah, you're thrown out of Andalusia. You may be persecuted to the point of perhaps having to pretend to be a Muslim or not. You get to Fez, you have a couple of years of quiet, persecution again. You go to Israel, your ship more or less capsizes. By miracle, you actually make land, and then you can't make a living. Everything is a mess. So you go off eventually to Egypt, and there you happen to hit upon a nice shtetl for a while. This, says the Rambam, is the major obstacle right through to true prophecy. So now we have to look forward, I guess, to local prophets arising. Who will make the mark? Yoshua.
Can you give me a curriculum how to reach that state?
I will again put you off, but I'm
Sure.
going to, because the Rambam himself has already told you. Astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, physiognomy, medicine, biology, metaphysics, Aristotle, Themistius, Alexander of Aphrodisias, a wonderful command of every single language, a knowledge of what's happening, being close to the, okay. But that's why I'm holding this out to you as a bait. Chazon Ish writes about Nuvuah in his time. Wait, or you can, if you like, I can send you some of the sources. You can wait through the Chazon Ish, but I would recommend you to wait. Okay? Are there any more questions? If not, then I will say that's it for this evening, folks. Another evening.